Hi, good evening and welcome to Biztech's Asia Pacific Cybersecurity Show. Now, through this show, we update the region on the latest threats and incidences to help you better protect yourselves. Now, joining the conversation and as always, to bring an expert lens to the show, we have my co-host who is back, Benjamin Ang. He's the head of Center of Excellence for National Security and Digital Impact Research at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at the NTU in Singapore. Ben, it's always great to have you back on the show after quite a few weeks of absence.
Glad to be back, Brian.
Now, Ben, for a start, there's been quite a few incidences out of Singapore, and we're going to focus on Singapore today. Now, firstly, there was a breach in the Marina Bay Sands Casino where the personal information of about 665,000 members of the MBS Shoppers Rewards Program was accessed by an unknown third-party data breach last month. Now, break it down for us. What was the impact of this data breach?
Brian, this is unfortunately a lot of people are members of this rewards program, and it's the rewards program for the huge MBS shopping center in Singapore. So, all these members' personal data, which is their names, email addresses, phone numbers, country residence, and membership numbers, were leaked, and they are probably available right now on the dark web. And fortunately, credit card numbers were not leaked, even though,
Okay,
yeah.
so Ben, then, okay, with all of that information leaked, what do we need to do as individuals to protect ourselves if we were on that list?
We have to be careful because the people can make use of that information to craft very convincing messages that tell you that you've bought something from a shop in MBS, or you bought something from a particular store, and here you need to click to make sure that you redeem your points, or some other thing that looks very convincing because they've got all this personal information about you. And also to be careful to change your passwords, because a lot of people reuse the same password that is used for your shopping, and they reuse it for other things like banking or other transactions. So please change your passwords.
And we've talked about this before. In fact, Ben, I've gone low tech as you have advised previously. I have a little book now with all my passwords written down so that and so I've done the things that you suggested on the show, which is really vary your passwords, change them a little bit more regularly. So I've got a little blue book, and then the passwords gets changed. Low tech, but as you said, that's probably a very secure way of doing it.
Yes, Brian, so long as you keep that notebook safe, you should be safer than nobody's going to be able to hack into it.
Yes, because what you outlined was if we put something on a Google Doc or something, that's accessible somehow.
The moment somebody gets your Google password, then you're in
Everything
there.
is acceptable.
Mm.
Absolutely. Now, the second thing I want to bring up, Ben, which has happened in Singapore as well, is the web services outage that affected public hospitals and polyclinic recently, which was in fact a denial of it's a DDoS attack, right? Tell us about this, Ben, and how serious it really was.
So this is serious on one level because it affected the major hospitals in Singapore, and it showed that there's really vulnerability because the patients or people from the public were not able to access the websites. Fortunately, medical procedures could still carry on, and people could still get their medical appointments and to go in. But it also shows that, something like DDoS, which is when thousands of devices or computers are launched on a website at the same time, you still end up knocking out the web services of a business. And this can have real great impact on the business itself, and of course on the customers, or in this case, the patients.
And what's really worrying with all of this is actually the following. So the first one, of course, it's information which okay, it's perhaps not a mission critical thing. Here we're talking about public hospitals and patients' lives. So this worries me tremendously.
The good news is that, well, patients' lives were not at risk for this because the mission critical systems still work. So that's the good news. The bad news is that the different hospitals actually had backup systems to try to prevent this DDoS. But apparently, all the backup systems led back to the same provider. So by taking out one provider, you're able to knock out multiple hospital systems.
Wow. Okay, that's an interesting thing, which brings me to our third story, which I wanted to talk about, the DBS City Bank outage. Now, was that a cyber attack that many presumed, or was it just a case of vendor failure?
Well, all the evidence so far shows, and the public investigation so far point to it being a technical failure, which in some ways is actually more scary than an actual cyber attack, because it
Okay,
shows that, yeah,
yeah, go ahead, Ben.
because it shows it's actually possible to knock out a banking system for 12 hours, which affects like the whole of Singapore, and not just for customers of those banks, but customers of other banks as well, because vendors and F&B outlets, even petrol stations are using these banks for their payment systems. So it affects the whole country.
So, Ben, I don't understand this. So, break it down for me because, we've been in IT for decades now. The traditional thing is you have disaster recovery, your disaster recovery plan as a hot site and a cold site. A hot site means you're going to be up maybe in half an hour or something like that. A cold site is something that you activate over a longer period of time. This one was obviously an outsourced vendor, so everything's on the cloud. But shouldn't we have those sort of things in place already? And this leads back to the same problem which you outlined with the public hospital. Everything went back to one vendor. I struggle to understand this. Break it down for us.
So, Brian, you're exactly right. I'm not going to blame any bank or any provider for this, because I think this is a thing that businesses all over have been doing the same thing. That when you want to have a backup, and now it's actually a good practice to have your backup being done by a professional backup system, because you may not be able to run your professional backup in-house. But when you see multiple businesses, especially in the same sector, that are pointing back to the same backup, or if you have multiple backups that are pointing back a few steps behind to the same provider, then you realize that if something went down on that provider, then it's going to affect not just your backup, but your second backup as well. So
Exactly. And this is the same
everything.
thing. This is going to happen. And why obviously we're speaking about this is if we have a cyber attack, these are all the same considerations that we need to keep in mind.
And in a way, we are lucky that it happened and it wasn't a cyber attack. So it gives us an opportunity now to prepare and to make sure that we don't have these really interdependent systems, that we actually have backup that are truly independent. And if your backup needs to be off-site, it needs to be offshore, then we need to think about how we're going to really make sure that your backups, and even for small business, right? You might have a backup that is on, let's say, a hard disk somewhere. But if that hard disk is sitting next to your computer and the roof falls on the computer and your backup hard disk, they're both gone.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on that note, Ben, that's it for this week's APAC Cybersecurity Show. We've been speaking to Benjamin Ang, Head of Center of Excellence for National Security and Digital Impact Research at the NTU in Singapore. And I'm Brian Fernandez. Check out this show on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.